Which option best summarizes paragraph 3? This is the paragraph that we are talking about, the third paragraph. Here, there are two sets of key ideas. First, we have the introduction to the problem of educating students, especially students in school. That's what the passage is all about. The first line says the content of various disciplines is typically encountered in forms quite remote from the conceptions the students bring to the class. The paragraph after this, it establishes that the new material that students learn is quite alien to them. So the students learn about the laws of physics or the causes of war by reading a textbook or by hearing the teacher lecture. So they don't see these in practical application, or these wars, of course, they are in the past. So they won't be able to see it, but they learn about this by reading about it or by listening to a lecture by a teacher. Hence, the challenge for the educator, for the teacher, is threefold. The first one is to introduce these often difficult or counterintuitive notions to the students. So just to introduce these difficult and often counterintuitive notions that might be contradictory to what students know about real life, the ideas that they bring to school, the preconceived ideas that they bring to school. These might be difficult to understand, counterintuitive to those preconceptions. To introduce these notions to the students, that is one task. If said ideas, they are congruent with the previous ones, previously formed ideas, then the educator has to make sure that the new knowledge is ultimately synthesized with earlier ideas. So the preconceived notions and the new knowledge that the student is trying to learn, if they are compatible with each other, then the educator has to make sure that these two gel together, these two meld together to form an overall corpus of knowledge in the student's mind. And third, to ensure that the newer disciplinary content supplants previously held conceptions or stereotypes that will in some way collide with or undermine the new forms of knowledge. So in the cases where the preconceptions and the new knowledge that the student is trying to learn, in the cases where these two are not compatible with each other, they are contradictory, where the previously held notions, conceptions, stereotypes, these would undermine the new knowledge. These would collide with, challenge the new knowledge, contradict the new knowledge. In that case, these preconceptions, these stereotypes, these should be removed from the minds of the students so that they can learn the newer disciplinary content, or basically the new knowledge. These are the three challenges that the teachers face when teaching these notions to the students, which are remote and difficult to understand. So option A says there is a threefold challenge faced by the educator to enable the student to clear his misconceptions brought about by studying without understanding. There are two problems with this. We start with there is a threefold challenge faced by the educator. Quite correct. Then it says to enable the student to clear his misconceptions. This is a distortion because one, we are not talking about the student clearing his own misconceptions, his or her own misconceptions. We are talking about the educator clearing the students' misconceptions. That is something which relates to point number 3. The newer disciplinary content supplants previously held conceptions or stereotypes that would in some way collide with or undermine the new forms of knowledge. So previously held conceptions, stereotypes that would collide, undermine new forms of knowledge, that in a generalization can be called misconceptions. But here we are talking about the educator ensuring that the newer content supplants these misconceptions. So first, there is a distortion in this phrase, enable the student to clear his misconceptions. What we are talking about in the passage is for the teacher to clear the misconceptions of the students. Second, this applies to only point number 3 or challenge number 3. Why not mention 1 and 2 to introduce these ideas, these notions to the students? That should take precedence. Either we mention all the 3 challenges or we mention none of the 3 challenges. Mentioning 1, that 2, which is challenge number 3, where 1 is more important. The introduction to these ideas is more important. It is not more important as such, but it takes precedence, it takes preference, it is higher in priority than clearing out the previously held conceptions or stereotypes or misconceptions. So there's no reason to phrase the statement or the summary in this form. And then we have a major distortion at the end by saying clearing out his misconceptions brought about by studying without understanding. Studying without understanding is an aspect which is not discussed in the passage at all. That is completely outside the premise. The passage is all about the challenges that the educator faces in teaching new language or new knowledge rather to students in schools. So this part of this option A, is outside the premise. Hence, A is incorrect. Option B says, because the educator is faced with the challenge of inculcating a new thought process in the students, there are three ways in which he can bring about a change. This again is very much distorted. Because the educator is faced with the challenge of inculcating a new thought process in the students. So we may say that it is possible to not possible to call this thing inculcating a new thought process in the students a challenge, but that can be inferred because we've seen that these disciplines they are typically encountered in forms which are remote from the conceptions of the students. They need the introduction of ideas that are difficult or counterintuitive to the students. So this might be called a challenge. So this first part is okay. The distortion comes in the later part. First off, because the educator is faced with this challenge, there are three ways in which he can bring about a change. So we are saying that these challenges arise because the educator is faced with the task of teaching children. That is a severe distortion. That's an exaggeration. That is not something that the passage says. The passage does not say that the challenges arise because of the need to teach students or the teacher's task in teaching students. And then again, it says there are three ways in which he can bring about a change that is also extremely distorted. There are three challenges faced by the educator or the teacher. These are not established as ways in which they can bring about a change. That's extremely generalized. So we are saying that this is an invalid summary. One, because it leaves out the three challenges. If we clear this out and we highlight just the challenges, then we find that the challenges is about half of, if not more than half of. It is in fact more than half of the third paragraph. So that should not be left out. In any case, if it is left out, this has been extremely wrongly worded. The wording of this summary is very distorted. The correct summary here, again, if we clear this out, the correct summary would be, because the educator is faced with the task of inculcating new thought processes in students, there are three challenges which the educator faces. That would be a correct summary. This one, quite distorted. So B is incorrect. Option C tells us, the students who learn by hearing the teacher's lecture pose a problem to the educator who has a threefold challenge in front of him. Again, lots of distortions. First off, the students who learn by hearing a teacher's lecture pose a problem. This is an aspect, this is an argument which has definitely not been made. It's definitely a distortion. Because students learn about these things, laws of physics, causes of war, by hearing the teacher lecture, that is why they pose a problem, and that is why the educator has a threefold challenge. That is incorrect. The problem is that these content or this content rather, this knowledge is encountered in forms which are remote from the conceptions that the students bring to the class. They are difficult to understand, counterintuitive often. It's not the problem that the students are learning from a teacher's lecture. In that case, the solution would be the teachers should stop lecturing. That is completely irrelevant. That is not what the passage is trying to tell us at all. Then again, we have the students learning about. So the problem is the methodology of learning, the encountering of these remote forms. And that is done in two ways, by reading a textbook or by hearing a teacher lecture. Again, why zero in specifically on one of those? If there's a problem, there has to be a problem with both. And then the final distortion comes in this: pose a problem to the educator who has a threefold challenge in front of him. Here, the way this has been worded, it distances the threefold challenge from the educator teaching the students. The educator has to teach students in the teaching has to be done in forms that are remote to the students' conceptions. There is knowledge which is being taught, and this knowledge is often difficult and counterintuitive to the students' preconceived notions. That is why there is a threefold challenge in front of the educator. It is not a separate point. It is not a separate argument, as this option makes it out to be. So C is also quite distorted. We can eliminate C. Option D says the educator has to ensure three things: that previous learning patterns do not pose a hindrance to knowledge acquisition. Through the new methodology, new ideas integrate with pre-existing thinking. And finally, in case of a clash, previous information must be displaced. Here we see that the educator's challenges, the three challenges, they are mentioned. There's a very slight distortion in the first part, that previous learning patterns do not pose a hindrance to knowledge acquisition. Not exactly what we are talking about. We are saying that introducing these often difficult or counterintuitive notions to the students, but in essence, it is the same. In order to introduce these often difficult or counterintuitive notions to the students, the teacher has to ensure that previous learning patterns do not pose a hindrance to knowledge acquisition, to the students learning this new knowledge. Then, and that is through the new methodology. Of course, new knowledge, new methodology. New ideas integrate with pre-thinking. New ideas should be synthesized with earlier ideas. And finally, in the case of a clash, previous information must be displaced. Finally, if the ideas are, we see the previous point, they are congruent with each other, preconceived ideas and the new knowledge. If they are not congruent with each other, if they would collide with or undermine the new forms of knowledge, then they should be replaced or displaced or supplanted. That is the key idea. So if we see the highlights, then it is this entire part of the passage that this option covers. It leaves out the original argument, the first argument, that these forms are remote to the students' conceptions, what conceptions they bring to the class, and the problems that the students face. And the teachers thus have these challenges, but they are subsumed in this argument. Previous learning patterns do not pose a hindrance. So various disciplines typically encountered in the forms are quite remote from the conceptions that students bring. These remote forms of learning, or the remote nature of the learning of these new knowledge should not pose a problem, should not pose a hindrance. So this is also subsumed, which means that D is the closest that we can get to a perfect summary of the third paragraph. That is the correct answer.